Bucharest rain has the patience of a witness. It doesn't fall so much as take notes, beating along tram cables and dripping from the bronze mustaches of statues that remember more monarchs than names. I watched it from the cafe window, a rectangle of fogged glass that made the city look like it had been drafted in pencil and left unfinished. The cafe was one of those places that had tried to renovate into modernity and stopped halfway. Edison bulbs, a chalkboard menu that never changed, tabletops salvaged from a school that had probably taught a dictator his cursive, journalists nested here between deadlines, and a constellation of late-night eccentrics orbited the sockets that still worked. I had a notebook, 2 pens, and the particular restlessness that creeps in when your editor stops calling you, our person on the ground, and starts calling you freelance. He sat down across from me without asking. Green scarf to green, a shade you find in peacock throats and warning labels. His coat was the kind men wear to look poorer than they are. The first thing I noticed were his hands, long-fingered, clean, but nicked along the knuckles as if mirrors had fought back. "You're the one who wrote about the man in Ploiecti who married the wind," he said, voice soft with grit. "You called it a kindness dressed as madness." I did. I didn't offer my name. He hadn't offered his. "You write myths without sneering. That's rare." The way he said myths made it sound like a family name. "I try to keep my teeth sheathed," I said, "because cynicism is cheap and I was tired of being poor." He set a business card on the table and slid it toward me. It was not a card, not really, matte black, with a single small scale embossed in the center. It caught the light in a way paper shouldn't. I touched it and felt the faintest resistance, as if it didn't entirely believe in my fingers. "Your city is good for secrets," he said. "Overlapping empires make polite liars. And you?" I asked. "What do you make?" "Arrangements," he said. "Apologies. Sometimes war. Tonight, truth, if I can pay for it." "You're buying my time?" "I'm buying your willingness to be altered by what you hear." Outside, a bus hissed to a stop. Someone laughed the way a bottle breaks. Inside, the milk frother shrieked as if scalded. He leaned forward, and the bulb above our table haloed the planes of his face. It took me a moment to realize what was wrong with it. Nothing, exactly. Everything was at a proper human ratio, but every angle was slightly over-articulated, as if a sculptor had sharpened the edges one pass too many. When he blinked, it was quick and vertical, a trick of the light. I told myself, the bulb, the rain. "Midnight," he said. "Natural History Museum. Service entrance. Ring a recorder and an open wound?" I asked, because he had not yet said it, but I could feel the sentence pacing behind his teeth. He smiled without pleasure. "You are a quick study." "Why me?" "Because you believe to incompatible things, that truth is holy, and that people should be forgiven for touching it with dirty hands." He tapped the card. "That makes you a functional witness." I looked at the card again, because it was easier than looking at him. The scale felt warmer now, as if it had a pulse of its own. "Who are you?" I asked. "A diplomat with a painful assignment," he said, and stood. He wrapped the green scarf around his neck with a care that looked learned, like a ceremonial knot, and when the fabric slid against his skin I saw something stir along his wrist, an arrangement of subdermal ridges shifting, not tendon, not vein. The human eye is a generous editor. Mine cut the strange from the frame and left me a man with a scarf, and an appointment I ought to refuse. After he left, I sat for a long time, with my coffee cooling into a lens that warped the ceiling bulbs into pale meteors. I had promised myself a different life once, textbooks, quiet, students who turned in essays full of clumsy hope. Instead, I chased stories that made sane people inch their chairs away. At 11:47, I walked to the museum. Bucharest at that hour is a language of locked doors and dogs. The museum rose from the street like a simplified cathedral, all columns and imperial squareness. A building designed to make you feel small enough to pay. The service entrance was where service entrances always are, round the back, beneath a lamp that makes shadows look convicted. The door was propped open with a catalog the size of a tomb. Inside, the air was cool and seeded with the dust of things that had stopped mattering in the present tense. The security guard on duty glanced up, clocked me, clocked the recorder in my hand, and sank back into his game show with the resigned indifference of a man who had seen ghosts. and invoices and knew which one filled out forms. He emerged from between two display cases as if stitched from the dark. The green scarf was gone. Without it, his throat looked textured, not scaled like a dragon on a child's t-shirt, not monstrous, subtle like embroidery under skin. He lifted a hand. The overhead fluorescence softened obediently, sliding from sterile to lunar. "Thank you for coming. I came to hear what you think truth costs," I said, and clicked the recorder on. The red lead made a little blood dot on the floor. He looked at the tyrannosaur jaw grinning under glass beside us, and placed two fingers against his sternum, a gesture that felt like an oath in a language I did not speak. "I will confess," he said, voice low enough to make the glass hum. "Not to a crime, but to a design. Confession requires guilt," I said. "Do you have any?" "An ocean of it," he said, "and islands of pride. It is complicated to make a species and then ask it for forgiveness." The recorder whirred. The building listened with the dignity of old stone. "We called you the invention," he said. "You called yourselves humanity." I had the ridiculous sensation that the bones in the cases were leaning closer. "Start at the part where you expect me to laugh," I said. He did not smile. "We are older," he said, "not just in years, but in outcomes. And there, in the museum's gut, in the patient blue of after-hours light," he began to dismantle what I thought my species had arrived at alone. When he spoke, his syllables landed like careful feet on an unfamiliar floor. They did not falter. Neither did I. I had the sense of stepping onto ice and discovering it held thinly, beautifully, with all the singing danger of a new truth bearing the weight of my doubt. He did not blink as often as I expected, but when he did, it was vertical. "We are older," he said, "not just in years but in outcomes. We learned what your species is still learning, how to survive success. We failed it at first." He told me a history that ran backward. His people call them the Therans, though that was only a translation. Developed brilliance like a rash. They mastered hunger with farms that walked, mastered weather with planetary thermals, mastered war by making it obsolete, and then they fell to the slow erosion of purpose. With every need solved, something essential atrophied. Curiosity chilled into bureaucracy. Art became proof of funding. Civilization locked around its own throat and squeezed gently, politely, for millennia. "Entropy in the mind," he said. "We became a species that did not want." They tried to heal themselves by engineering novelty, puzzles, labyrinthine games, symphonies of error. Nothing lasted. So they conceived something radical and cruel, an external engine of meaning. A species designed to want ferociously, err dramatically, love macilly, and in doing so, to agitate the stagnant ocean around it. "You," he said, "were that engine. Not slaves. Catalysts. We seeded an ancestor in a pocket of earth where failure could be frequent and cheap. We left tools disguised as stones, suggestions disguised as instincts." My skepticism must have lapped over the rim of my face. He nodded toward it. "You think this makes you artificial? It does not. The fire we brought was tinder. The lightning was yours. Then why hide?" I asked. "If we were your salvation, why watch us like ghosts?" "Because catalysis looks like chaos up close." He folded his hands. "We did not want to break you by trying to fix you." I remembered his invitation. Bring an open wound. "Is this your confession then? You created us to save yourselves, to save us both," he said. "But we made a second invention we did not expect, shame. We walked because confessions bruise less when shared at a patient pace." The museum after midnight was a city without weather, corridors that bent like streets, rooms named for extinctions, glass cases where time practiced being still. "Our footsteps kept the only calendar, story," he said, as if tasting a fruit that had once poisoned him. "It is the tool you invented that we could not. We had records perfect, neutral, narcotic. But you made narrative. You taught memory to sing. We passed a diorama of a prehistoric marsh. Taxidermied cranes held their beaks like arguments. Dragonflies hung mid-hover, pinned by invisible verbs. Somewhere a compressor exhaled, and the room cooled by a single thought. You think we invented story?" I asked, half defensive, half possessive. "You invented the compulsion to use it on yourselves," he said, "to hold the mirror up and then sharpen the glass. You learned to cut away what did not fit the plot. You learned to forgive by editing, and to justify by leaving facts out. Editing is mercy. I said before I could help it. Editing is power, he said. Mercy is what you aim it at. We turned into a narrow hall flanked by beetles, jeweled and monstrous, each labeled with a Latin name that sounded like a priest trying to make a secret official. The light there was surgical. He moved through it like someone who had practiced being seen. Our observers wrote stories about you for centuries, he said. They sent them home like care packages. They wrote of your impatience with injustice you invented yesterday. They wrote of your appetite for beginnings, how you could turn famine into a recipe, exile into a household word. Many of us fell in love. The confession surprised me. It didn't sound like a trap. It sounded like an apology for not having fallen sooner. And the others? I said, the others feared what we had feared for ourselves. That story cut both ways. You used it to ration compassion. You used it to sell war. You used it to place people on the wrong side of your ending. We stepped into the ocean room, where a blue light pretended to be depth. A whale skeleton floated overhead like a white thought held aloft by good intentions. He looked up, and the bones laid a fragile geometry across his face. Why wait to tell us? I asked. Why hide behind observers and send love letters instead of knocking on the door? He ran a fingertip along the edge of a glass case. The nail looked blunt. I knew better now. Because catalysis looks like vandalism up close. Because your worst tragedies were also your engines. Because every time we interfered gently, with a thumb on a scale, you taught us that your errors contain instructions. Our solutions would erase. Examples, I said. The reporter in me putting muscle on the word. The plague that taught you to build hospitals instead of statues. The famine that taught you to suspect kings. The flood that taught you where not to live and to share boats more generously. He looked at me. Interference would have produced better outcomes faster. But story does not metabolize faster. It metabolizes earned. We left the blue and climbed a flight of stairs. The stairwell walls were painted with a mural from the 1970s, bright, earnest, anatomically confused. The hand of the artist had been sure, if not informed. I liked it for the same reason I sometimes like first drafts, the audacity of sincerity. Some of us demanded disclosure, he said as we climbed. They argued that to create a species is to accept the obligation to be known by it. And you? I asked, where did you stand? In the middle, he said, which in politics is often indistinguishable from cowardice. I argued for a confession that would not become colonization. We arrived at the fundraiser installation the museum had inherited, like an eccentric aunt's furniture, a hall of mirrors left over from an event called, according to the hand-lettered placard, Reflections on the Anthropocene. Several mirrors had begun to silver at the edges. Time nibbled even on narcissism. In those panels, we were a deck of possibles. If I stood just so, my face braided with his into something a lens could not have trusted. In another, my eyes lengthened into pupils that debated with light instead of admitting it. In a third, he softened toward me, skin losing its geometry, as if reflection itself were a species that preferred consensus. He stopped at the small fracture in the corner of the central mirror, a tiny wound where the silvering had peeled back to reveal bare glass and, behind it, honest wall. He touched the chip with the tenderness you give a scar. This is what story does, he said. It reflects, then cuts, then shows the plaster beneath the myth. It's a mirror and a knife. It is also a window if you survive it. Some people don't, I said. Some fall into the gap and never climb out. Yes, he said. And some pull a ladder through with them. We stood there, the museum holding its breath with professional patience, while he named the ways story had saved us and punished us. Folktales that smuggled maps through borders. Testimony that turned murder into law. Propaganda that taught a generation how to hold a gun without shaking. Memoirs that apologized to no one and taught a city how to weep without drowning. The evening gathered these examples like moths. You've been watching, I said. The understatement so thin I could see through it. Watching is the laziest verb, he said gently. We have also learned and failed. We gave you distance because we had learned to fear our nearness. We told ourselves we were being ethical. Some of us were being afraid. The truth about humanity, I said, echoing his promise, is that we aren't just yours. The truth about us, he said, is that we aren't just yours either. We are what we became because we made you. We are parents who adopted ourselves when we saw what you could do with grief." He stepped away from the mirror as if his reflection had exhausted him. The shift of light across his skin was a weather system. He was tired, and I realized with a start that it wasn't human tiredness, no ache in the lower back, no yawn, but a ceremonial fatigue. The where that comes from carrying a story you've promised to tell only once. "You asked why now," he said. "Because your species has started to solve your hungers faster than you invent new appetites. Hunger taught you to share and to steal. It made you clever and cruel, but always moving. You have machines now that promise to solve meaning the way you solved cold. That is a very attractive apocalypse. You think we'll become you," I said. "I think you might become the worst version of us," he said. "Comfortable, brilliant, pointless, and the best version." He looked back at the mirrors. "In one, we were almost beautiful. The best version of you becomes a weather system for the galaxy. You host meaning like a climate hosts rain." We left the hall of mirrors and entered a smaller gallery, where bones were arranged not into skeletons, but into patterns, the aestheticization of mortality. A placard explained it as an educational display about comparative anatomy. It read, unintentionally poetic, "Parts in common. What do we have in common?" I asked, reading it aloud. "Shame," he said, "and the desire to outgrow it." The word sat between us like a stool no one wanted to be offered. He didn't make me ask. "We thought we were noble," he said. "We told ourselves stories about stewardship and duty, as if we were a mountain and you were a stream. But the truth is simpler and uglier. We were bored. We invented you to disturb the pond. And then you were so beautiful we forgot our cynicism, and the shame of our original motive grew teeth." I took a breath I hadn't noticed I'd been measuring. "So the confession is for you. The confession absolves the confessor," he said, echoing himself from earlier, and then he shook his head. "No absolution. Not tonight. I didn't come for that." He slipped a hand inside his coat, and something under his skin translated the motion into a rippling I would later dream about, because it resisted metaphor. When his hand came out, it held a small vial, I thought, absurdly, of perfume counters and holy water. He did not hold it like a weapon or an ornament. He held it like a sentence with a comma he was not sure belonged. "Before you ask," he said, "it is not a cure, not a sedative, not a leash. It is an appetite you have described in your own stories for centuries, and not yet been able to install." He set the vial on a display plinth that once held the jawbone of something that had bitten history into shape. The jaw was gone to conservation. The emptiness made room. "What is it?" I asked, though some part of me recognized the answer in the same way the body recognizes a weather change. "Before the mind finds the word, a way to make remembrance feel as necessary as air," he said, "to make gathering and testifying and correcting one another into a pleasure you do not easily forfeit, to make the commons a reflex." He did not reach for it again. He let it gleam faintly in the soft museum light, dark filament drifting inside like a question learning how to spell itself. "You said you didn't come for absolution," I said. "I came to pay a debt," he said. "We borrowed your chaos and spent it until it taught us to love you. Now we owe you a tool and a choice," I said, feeling the gravity of the moment tilt the room a degree toward morning. "Yes," he said, and the word did not land. It opened. "A story is only a mirror until someone decides which edge is safe to touch." We stood there in the room of parts in common to arrangements of bone and intention, not so different in the math, while the night finished its long argument with the horizon. He looked at the vial as if it were an altar and a door and a small, stubborn hope. "Why me?" I asked, hearing the fatigue in my own voice and forgiving it. "Because you write kindly," he said again, but this time it wasn't a compliment. It was a requirement. Kindness is how a knife becomes a tool and not a wound. Somewhere a radiator ticked. The guard coughed. The city softened its clench. He gestured toward the vial without touching it. "When you're ready," he said, "choose the edge." The vial looked like a raindrop that had made a private decision. It sat in my palm with the gravity of a promise, cool and heavier than logic, as if it contained a compressed hour. Inside, a dark flake drifted like ash that had remembered fire. "We coded for instincts," he said again, as if repetition might make the arithmetic less blasphemous. survival, reproduction, belonging, curiosity, remembrance we argued over for a century. Your kind, so new, wore amnesia like armor. Forgetting let you leave caves, leave gods, leave the people who hurt you. We feared that to bind remembrance into your bodies too early would turn history into shackles. And now, I asked, the word echoed off quartz and glass and mounted jaws. Now you abandon the past, because your machines can retrieve it faster than your elders can speak it. He said, you outsource memory to devices that profit when you forget the terms of your consent. You need an appetite that refuses deletion. He walked as he talked, drawing me through the museum's sleeping arteries, fish in formaldehyde, beetles pinned like ideas, a room of birds frozen mid-impossible flight. The rain outside had turned contemplative. I could hear it counting itself on the roof. What is it? I asked, holding the vial to the dim light. The flake caught it and split it, hunted the hall with a tone I felt more than heard. A biologic poem, he said. It teaches cells to prize the shared account. It nudges neurotransmitters so that testimony is as satisfying as sugar, correction as relieving as a yawn. It strengthens the urge to gather facts together, not to win, but to maintain. Mind control with better PR, I said. His mouth twitched. I prefer plumbing to puppetry. It does not steer choices. It tends pipes. And what happens to arguments? I asked, to art born from misremembering? To mercy that requires forgetting? Remembrance is not hoarding, he said. It is compost. You keep what must feed today and return the rest to the soil. Your art will know the difference. Your mercy will choose when to remember and when to ritualize the letting go. We reached a low room with a domed ceiling where school groups learn. That continence moves slower than friendships. In the center stood a circular bench. He sat, I did not. The vial warmed against my lifeline like a small sun learning my orbit. Why give me a choice? I asked. Why not seed it in the water and let it bloom unnoticed? He looked up at the dome, where hairline cracks mapped the plaster like rivers in drought. Because secrecy is how we began to die, he said. We solved problems privately until privacy became the problem. This must start in public, on purpose, with a mouth attached to it. I pictured 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Governments conferring with the same hunched posture as vultures. Corporations buying the recipe to turn remembrance into loyalty programs. Zealots baptizing infants into a future that felt safe because it was small. What if it gets co-opted? I asked. It will, he said simply. And then stolen back. And then diluted. And then rebottled. That is the rhythm of anything alive. The fifth instinct is not a cure. It is a muscle. It must be exercised, injured, healed, and made stronger by use. I sat. My open wound, I said, and surprised myself by speaking aloud what I usually kept as a quiet bruise, the quote I trimmed. So a grieving father sounded crueler. The voicemail I didn't return until it was a memorial. The story I published true enough to pass, but not true enough to keep me from seeing the boy. It hurt on the tram sometimes. He listened the way a good cathedral listens, not to answer, but to make your voice larger than your shame. Remembrance is how a wound chooses its scar, he said, not to hide the injury, but to tell it forward. He showed me how to uncap the vial without waking the building. The seal breathed when it broke, a sigh that smelled like winter and citrus and something metallic, like the edge of a coin. The flake fluttered, a black petal learning gravity. If I drink this, I said. What happens tonight? You will dream, he said. Not visions and dragons. Logistics. Names you forgot you knew. Rooms arranged so people can see one another's mouths. Tables that insist on leaving an empty chair for the one who cannot yet bear to come. You will dream the boring holiness of running a commons. And tomorrow, you will write something you did not plan to write. It will be full of assertions that beg to be corrected. And people will correct you. You will thank them publicly. That is how it spreads through the pleasure of being improved without being humiliated. And if I refuse, he nodded toward the exit. Then you will still write. But this will remain a story about a choice you did not make. And that, too, is a kind of honesty nations can use. The museum's heating coughed awake. The building shivered around us like a giant animal smelling weather. Tell me something without metaphor, I said. A single unpoetic sentence that makes this less like a hymn. He considered. Then, if you do this, more people will enjoy being corrected. I laughed, quick and unwelcome as a sneeze. That's your sales pitch. It is our best metric for peace. I looked at the vial, at the man whose face kept almost agreeing with mine, at the bones that had been arranged into stories, so school children could measure themselves against things that had stopped moving. I thought of my mother's kitchen calendar with its saints and appointments, boxes too small for an honest day. I thought of the square in my dream, the microphone going hand to hand like bread, the city naming itself without waiting for permission. Do you have a name? I asked. A stall, a courtesy, a small mercy. He took his time. We do not share the ones that bind us, he said. Call me pardoned, are you? Not yet. The vial was warm enough now to feel like a living thing. I lifted it. It trembled the way a compass needle trembles when it finds the place where it can be most useful. I thought of all the times I had chosen silence because I could not guarantee accuracy, and how that had been a kind of cowardice masquerading as care. I thought of all the times I had spoken with the easy confidence of a quote that fit the arc, and how that had been a kind of violence. I can't consent for a species, I said again. Stubborn, small, you can consent for a story, he said. And stories are the only species that reproduce across every border. I drank. It tasted like cold, like the first inhale after a hard cry, like the smell of library stacks when you're 11 and your body has discovered it is a container. It tasted like the hand of someone you love tightening when the lights dim in a theater. It tasted like the time my father admitted he didn't know and my respect for him didn't fall, but grew an extra room. The flake dissolved. The world did not tilt. No chorus pressed up under the floorboards. Just a coolness in my bones and a sense that somewhere a gate had been oiled. We walked out into the blue-smudged morning. A tram whispered along its rails like a silver animal. He wrapped the green scarf back around his throat, imperfectly, and this time I helped, making the knot easy, human. One more thing, I said. The truth about humanity. The whole truth. He looked at me as if measuring the time it takes a sunrise to forgive a night. You are not a test we gave ourselves, he said. You are the rescue we asked for, and then had to deserve. He turned away, and for a second I saw the ripple under his skin, the old architecture holding its breath to pass among us. He vanished into the thinning dark with the same courtesy a man uses to hold a door, and not wait to be thanked. I went home. I slept with my notebook under my pillow and dreamed of the square again. This time there were small, fussy details. Tape on the ground so wheelchairs could pivot easily. A corner table where translations bloomed in pencil, and then pen, and then print. A ceramic bowl with slips of paper labeled corrections we are glad for. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought a folder of receipts. A child read dates like spells. The microphone passed like bread. When I woke, the city felt newly legible, like my apartment had been translated. I opened the notebook and began to write not a manifesto, not a plea, not even an ending. A protocol for how to remember one another without sharpening each other into enemies. A recipe for the commons. A way to make correction feel like belonging. It wasn't mine alone. That was the point.